Question number 10, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Trade and asks, does he have any concerns about the inclusion of investor-state dispute settlement provisions in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, provisions which allow multinational companies to sue governments in secretive offshore tribunals? And if so, what are those concerns?
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr. Speaker, I would have a number of concerns about signing up to an investor-state dispute settlement provision in any trade agreement that did not protect the right of future governments to regulate in the public interest, that allowed non-transparent and unfair procedures to apply, or would encourage frivolous claims by foreign corporations that would have no merit in the legal sense. Happily, I can inform the House that this government will not be signing an agreement that does not meet any of those basic political and judicial tests.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How can he be confident that ISDS provisions don't put New Zealand at risk when the German government is currently being sued under ISDS for $7 billion for trying to phase out nuclear power plants by a company called Vattenfall, a company that has already used ISDS threats to stop the German government from putting environmental regulations on a new coal-fired power plant?
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr. Speaker, I won't go into the entrails of that particular dispute, which is not, in fact, an attempt by the company to stop a democratically elected German government from shifting its policy on nuclear power. It is about the financial implications of that decision. The reality is that we will not be signing up to an agreement that does not cover the basic interests of New Zealand.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, has the Minister seen the June report from the Australian Productivity Commission, a commission established by the Conservative Prime Minister John Howard, where the Australian Productivity Commission opposed the inclusion of ISDS provisions in trade agreements, including explicitly the TPP, because of concerns about ISDS on the ability of the Australian government to regulate?
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr. Speaker, no, I've not personally seen that particular report, but what I am aware of is that the Australian government, and of course I'm in closest consultation with my counterpart Australian Minister, is arguing for exactly the same balanced approach to ISDS as is the New Zealand government.
Supplementary question, Fletcher Tabuto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What assurances can the Minister give that decisions made in secret in a secret tribunal under ISDS will be fair, given the tribunal consists of only 3 highly paid corporate lawyers with no actual presiding judge?
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr. Speaker, as is always the case in these TPP-related questions, when the full detail is put out into the public debate, people of New Zealand will be able to see for themselves that the defences that I, the Prime Minister and other ministers have made are in fact entirely credible, that this will protect New Zealand from exactly those sorts of frivolous claims.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
A supplementary question, Fletcher Tabuto.
Thank you, sir. Can the Minister explain how he can be comfortable that once corporate lawyers make a ruling against New Zealand within the secret ISDS tribunal, that there is no right of appeal for the New Zealand government?
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr. Speaker, we're just going round in circles here. When the full provisions are out in the public domain, people will be able to see for themselves that there are very carefully thought through safeguards that will protect the interests of New Zealand. And I would also like to point out that on the latest international net investment liability statement of New Zealand, we have about $170 billion of foreign investment in other countries. We have a very strong material interest in ensuring that our investors are treated properly by governments whose procedures may not always be up to the same high standard.
Supplementary.
A supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
Will the Minister undertake that the TPP and its ISDS clauses will not prevent a future New Zealand government banning the sale of New Zealand homes to foreign buyers from TPP countries?
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr. Speaker, It is not the government's policy to engage in such a ban. We are negotiating on the basis of this government's policy.
Point of order, the Honourable David.
That clearly was not my question, sir.
Order.
I seldom get answers.
Order. On this occasion, I'm going to allow the member to repeat that question for the benefit of the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will he undertake that the TPP and its ISDS clauses will not prevent a future New Zealand government banning the sale of New Zealand homes to foreign buyers from TPP countries?
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
No, I'm not going to give that assurance, but what the agreement will say on that is still under negotiation, and it may interest the member at the time when I'm in a position to answer that more fully.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What did the Australian Productivity Commission get wrong in its June report from this year when it said with regard to ISDS provisions that they give substantive appeal rights to foreigners that are not available to domestic firms, they risk impeding domestic regulatory reform, they lack transparency and they have inadequate parliamentary scrutiny?
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the last time I looked at it, the New Zealand government does not control the Australian Productivity Commission. The basic position of the Australian government is to ensure that ISDS provisions will be properly balanced, will absolutely protect the Australian public interest. It may well be that some types of ISDS provisions do in fact have those consequences, but I don't believe the Australian government will be signing up to provisions that have those effects.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Why is it that the European Union Trade Commissioner is now refusing to agree to exactly the same kind of ISDS provisions that are proposed to be in the TPP, because the European Trade Commissioner says we want the rule of law, not the rule of lawyers, and that these ISDS provisions are not fit for purpose in the 21st century?
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Well, I have had the benefit, Mr. Speaker, of talking to the Commissioner about this issue, and what I can say to the House is that this is a process which is under evaluation internally in Europe. They have not put forward any specific proposals. They've put forward some concepts which I think are extremely interesting, and we'll see how that transpires in a negotiation between the European Union and the United States.
Question number 11. Jackie Dean.
Thank you, Mr.